Well, I'm really pleased to see you on this first question and answer session of the new year. And we got lots and lots of people on 2 screens, so I can't see you all at once. So if, I can't see you all raising a hand. I don't have this emoji thing. Oh yeah, reactions down here. If anybody wants to say, oh no, there's only the clapping and the.
Yeah, I noticed it. Yeah, I noticed it doesn't have the one that you raise your hand. I have taken webinars before where they have that emoji that you raise your hand and your instructor knows this one for some reason.
So maybe for our sort of etiquette here on tonight, as I can only see one screen, I hope if anybody wants to say something and that hand goes up, and if I can't, so hold your hand up and do the emoji. If I can't see your hand on this screen, I go to the other one to identify who's wanting to ask the question. And also please do put the question into the chat room if you can. All right. So we got most people on that probably will be with us tonight. And oh, Pete. Oh, hey. I got to introduce you. Pete Simmons. He's the godfather of all this. Without him, you wouldn't be here today with all of us.
Thank you, Hans-Gunther.
Absolutely. We need to honor everybody. And I want to say also thank you to the BDA in England, because Jess, I don't know who knows Jess in the office.
I do. I do know Jess through Zoom.
She's not just an angel. She is, for those who know the hierarchies, she's an archangel. In terms of the footwork she does for the biodynamic work to get out there, and has promoted this workshop, online workshop. Really so grateful to everyone there in the Biodynamic Association, and also anyone out there who's really connected people and done their networking and promoted by word of mouth. It's just amazing. And Pete, and then we go into the questions. I want to just say, I dropped him off today after landscaping together, and I was so taken back to see the chapel where he lives, the original Baptist chapel of Forest Row in Sussex. And he wanted to surprise me one day, and he said, I've got a surprise. And he showed me this old cow shed. It's now a little bit converted and so on, but it became the first Baptist church in Forest Row in Sussex, which by any... I don't know if anybody knows where Sussex is. That's where Winnie the Pooh was born.
Yeah.
Okay. And Milner, or whatever his name was, in Hartfield is the next village from here. And then it's Ashdown Forest, where the King Henry VIII was hunting the deer. And we have so many deer now. They're actually hunted down by cars that just actually passed the deer that just was killed by a car coming home today. So there's a lot of wildlife here. It's incredible. And some of you know how much there's around my house. But Pete showed me this chapel, and then I was like, oh my God, I lived in the first Baptist chapel priest house in Wales for 2 years, where the Baptist church had its inception. And Pete takes me to his place, which is the first Baptist chapel in Forest Row. And then he said, well, I want to start this cultural center. And I said, well, great. And he had me there and give the first practical course. And then, of course, over time, the lockdown happened and we're here now. So just to give you a little history, because it's always good to know a bit of history, and, have the godfather there who actually enticed me to do this. And he got me back into the groove of teaching. So really, really grateful, Pete, you're on. And
thank you.
Sharing with us tonight. And today for those
good to be here.
Anything you'd like to say just quickly, Pete, and then we jump into it?
I think simply to say that I'm really happy to see how everything has developed over the last 2 years, and that it seems like on Tuesday and today is like a new round starting, and how great that we're all here to listen to your enthusiasm and passion for nature and healing and at its core biodynamics, I would say. Yeah,
thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, blessings to you. And let's jump in. I've got one question here that came up actually already 2 or 3 times before, and I apologize for just taking it up now to Suela. I think she joined just now on the second screen here. It's about the digging and no digging. Just a quick raise of hands. Have we got any like opinion or like a dislike? Who would think it's more preferable to dig the soil in their situation? I'd like to just see a raise of hands. And who, let's just see, who is for digging and moving the soil?
John is.
Anybody? And John, I can't see you. Are you digging your soil?
And digging my soil, Hans. Yes, every day.
Okay, all right. And Saba, we have some no-shows there. Now, let's go the other way. Who reckons they prefer to not dig the soil at all? Okay. Oh, there's more hands going up and very fast. Yeah. Okay. More on the first screen, the second screen. All right. And then some I can't see, so you have to use the mojo. So the question was, dig versus no dig. I would say we have to really know our soil. And as we go through this course, on the Tuesdays, I will be introducing the different soils and how soils are formed, the history of soils, and all that in a nutshell. And for those who have a sandy, light soil and who have a high humus content, who have a crumbly soil, and who have had maybe, a pasture where the animals were grazing, or you had a lawn that built up humus and fertility over time, maybe digging is not necessary if you have a good structure in the soil. When there's enough air and light and warmth that can get into the cracks between the soil particles, so they're not knitted together and condensed by waterlogging or by a heavy soil on the other spectrum, which is a clay soil, which has no air spaces if it's just sitting there. It's just imagine soil sits there and people trample on it and animals trample on it, and then it rains on it, and the raindrops compact the soil usually if it's a heavy soil. And then often you see even puddling, even if there's a pasture that hasn't been taken care of properly. And particularly if it's level ground, if it's slanting, it's a bit different. So personally, I would say, depending where you are with your structure of the soil, digging or no digging is not a better or worse or right or wrong. It's just to see in which condition is your soil. Does your soil easily absorb warmth, air, and light? So the cosmic elements. And in biodynamics, we're very keen to disturb the soil and the soil life. And when I say disturb, I would rather even use the word stimulate by inserting a fork or hoeing the surface of the soil so that these cosmic forces that are streaming in constantly can actually mix and inform the soil life and the mycelia, etc. Now, if you have vegetables growing already, then the vegetables with their fiber optic channels, which are made up of silica and carbon, they bring that information with the roots deep into the soil, and then you might not have to disturb the soil if you have vegetables growing. But again, having said that, if the vegetables grow in a fresh garden, you have just started the garden, and it's waterlogging after every rain, and it's not opening up to the air and warmth element, you might have to put a fork in once in a while, or I'll show you some tools when we get to the soil side and the cultivation. Next time we start touching on that, and then we go even deeper in the soil module. There's certain tools that you can use to bring air, light, and warmth into the soil if it's a heavy soil. And that is particularly true in spring. If you want to have an early start and you had a very cold winter and a wet winter, then if you start forking or digging a soil, you bring that air and light and warmth in, and the soil can breathe more rapidly. Otherwise it stagnates. So having said that, and there are all the soil types in between that you have to figure. If you were to put a fork in the soil and you want to dig it, and the soil is so crumbly it falls through your fork, there's no need to dig that soil. It's crumbly, it's aerated, it's full of life and lifting kind of on its own because it's got humus and life in it. But if you had a soil and you put it on your fork and you dig a little ditch and dig like an inch of a slice with your fork, and then you push forward and then you lift that clod and see if it falls through the fork. If it doesn't fall through the fork, I would say it's recommendable to at least with a fork dig that soil over. And then Suela's question is, if I were to dig the soil, how do you dig that you don't mix up the layers? So we know that the top couple of inches are different microlife and worms and all the macroorganisms than the middle of the topsoil and the bottom of the topsoil. And if we mix all those, then they have to reestablish their communities. So how can we dig without inverting the soil? So traditionally, and that's, I don't know, Suela, I need to get really in touch with Charles Dowding when he does the experiments comparison between dig and no dig. If he actually, so if we put in the spade or the fork, and then what they do traditionally, since chemical farming and gardening has been developed, when they flip it over. So the bottom of the topsoil and a bit of subsoil comes onto the top, and the topsoil, the best, most humus-rich soil ends up at the bottom, if they have any humus left, because a lot of conventional gardeners who develop that kind of technique, they say, we invert the soil to bring the soil from below, where all the minerals have leached out because they didn't have any humus in a conventional garden or farm, to bring those back up to the top. But at the same time they do that, they bring soil up by inverting it that has no structure. So when it starts raining, it starts puddling it. It starts seizing it. So this is what some people call traditional gardening digging, of inverting the soil, is actually damaging the structure of the soil. And then by doing that, you bring up also, seeds that have penetrated down, that survived. Like, do you know that Rumex, the dock, does everybody know what dock is? No. Oh, is it a baddie? Sally goes, the seed of dock, in Spanish it's called lengua de vaca.
Yeah.
Point drop. All right, Flor. With those long pointed leaves, and then it's got these seed heads with millions of seeds that go brown. 70 years of them survive in the soil. 70 years they survive. So one of the no-dig principles is to not bring those seeds up again. And as they're down there, they will eventually rot away and not come to the surface again, because seeds, for them to germinate, they need light. So if we invert the soil and move it too much, that the bottom comes up again, we bring also old seeds up that are surviving for decades sometimes, okay? So that's a good point not to do no dig. But as I said, the way I dig, and I will show you some diagrams and sketches. I just want to pass this sort of on the surface today. So if I go in, say, here's the topsoil, Let's bring this down a bit there. So here's the topsoil. This is the top of the soil. So I put my fork, preferably the fork so I don't cut all the worms, put it in, move it forward to break the soil away from where it's connected. So it's easier then to lift. And then when I throw it forward like that. So I don't invert it. I just take, if this is the fork or the spade, I just throw that forward. And it lands the same way in the same layering as I took it out of the soil. And I just pile it up against each other. That way these layers don't mingle. That's only possible if the soil sticks together. That's why I say I only dig the soil when it sticks. When it doesn't stick, I don't need to dig it anymore. So when the soil develops in the garden, you need to dig less and less. Now, there are the no dig where they just mulch on the lawn with a cardboard, or some people even use carpet or plastic. And my experience with that is, and I really would love to see the soil underneath a garden that has been not dug, because I've seen 2 or 3 now in permaculture management. And when I come in to do some landscaping, what I see is a humus-rich layer on the top, like in the forest. Particularly when you go to the tropical forest, you have 15 centimeters black compost. And then in the forest, in the rainforest. Here in England, there's almost no humus in the forest. If you have 1 millimeter, 2-3 millimeters of humus in the forest, you're lucky in England. Because it's eaten right, it doesn't seem to build humus in the forest here, because there's not enough activity in the forest soil to build humus. So you have usually a layer of leaves that are half rotten, but then you have a fine layer of humus and subsoil. So when I started my garden in the cut down forest here, it was literally a bit of topsoil there on the edge of the forest, and then it was right subsoil with rock. So permaculture takes their premise from the rainforest that you have 15 centimeters of compost, and the no dig kind of follows that a bit too, which is so rich. But then underneath, the actual the soil is actually like subsoil. It doesn't mingle, It doesn't marry. Has anybody seen that? When they did a profile, you dig a profile, you dig like 60 centimeters into the soil to see the soil profile, and I'll show you some when we come to the soil section of our modules about soils. And you'd be surprised the layering and the separation of these horizons when you don't dig and just add compost on the top. And in the biodynamic understanding, we come from the premise that we want to actually have a gradual transition from topsoil to subsoil to rock, so that the roots penetrate really deeply into the subsoil, and the worms bring all the humus and the organic matter down. And that's encouraged through forking or digging, in my experience. So I'm kind of still on the other side of the fence of no dig, but when I get away not digging, I prefer that because it's less work, obviously. Suela, I don't know if that answers your question.
I'll have to have another look at the way you were showing what you were doing.
Yeah.
I don't know if I really understand the idea of 3 different layers of topsoil.
Yeah.
I'm unsure that I understand what you mean by topsoil. But never mind. Thank you very much.
Well, it's good you mentioned that, because for beginners, it might be important to just say quickly, the topsoil is that part of the soil. It's usually what Rudolf Steiner in the agriculture lecture calls the diaphragm of the earth, this thin living layer, which is richer in humus than what's below. So you see that layer about 20 centimeters, sometimes 10 centimeters. And in the forest, as I said, it's millimeters. That part we call topsoil because it's the richest in humus and life activity. with microbes, with mycorrhiza, with fungus, with bacteria, with spore-forming bacteria, with actinomycetes, what name it, you have it, protozoas, who produce all these beautiful substances, antibiotics and enzymes. That's the topsoil. The subsoil, strictly speaking, or sometimes they call it horizon B, is the subsoil, topsoil horizon A. That subsoil is usually devoid of any organic matter. The only organic matter is coming from the worm, the earthworm that takes leaves down and has little caves and stores like a hamster or like a squirrel, their nuts, in these little caves deep down in the earth. And in winter and spring, when there's no food, they eat from that. That's their nourishment, and they create drainage. So they're the only ones that go up and down. But all the other worms, they live in horizons, in the A horizon, in the topsoil, in the first layer, the second layer, and the third layer, different species. And then you find even different species of fungus and bacteria, depending how deep you go into the soil. That's why we don't want to invert the soil. We want to keep the layers intact by throwing it just forward if we do dig. So yeah, that's the main point. And then, you know, usually you have on horizon A, horizon B, so topsoil, subsoil, mother rock, where the soil is born from.
That's what I understand, Hans. I thought you said there were 3 layers of topsoil. Perhaps it was a misspeak.
No, I'm saying within the topsoil, there are 3 layers of different life forms. That's what I tried to say.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So hopefully that is answered. And as I say, as we go through the course, also for those who are on the course, we go much deeper into understanding all these different functions of soils and the different types of soils, you know, from the clay soil to the silt and the sandy soil, etc. So now
Hans, I've got a remark to that, because this was one of the reasons why I came on this course, because in my allotment I've tried for the last 10 years to do non-dig, because Charles Dowding came to our allotment and gave a talk when we started, and I thought it made a lot of sense. So I tried all sorts of different things, and I'm quite convinced. But why I joined here was that I found exactly what you said. You know, I can never get enough compost. So I spend, you know, a lot of money and a lot of different we don't have a car, so I have to buy stuff in, and you sort of, you know, you get cow manure, it's too fresh, you get horse manure, it's too runny, you get this. So I haven't, over the 10 years, I have not found a reliable source that he has, which he lives in the countryside and he's got this mushroom farm or whatever next to it. And this year I think I found someone, but I spent about £100, and I just felt, I like this idea of maybe becoming more sustainable, but I haven't found that yet with non-dig. Having said that, I like it because I see the slow worms in the soil and I don't want to dig them, or, you know, the frogs and things. So I'm curious.
Very, very good you say that. You know, it's good to get different viewpoints. I want to point out also one thing, and that is what you just mentioned. I didn't address that. When I see how much compost Charles is putting onto his beds, he talks about 1 inch, or in some cases even 1.5 inch of compost a year. And he says that 1/3 of what he turns over as compost is bought in. If you have that source, fantastic, you know, but again, in biodynamic gardening, farming, we're trying to build up the soil from what we have. So we build up this unique microbiome, soil biome in the soil to create the individuality of that garden specific, or that farm, or that garden farm, whatever it is, whatever size, it creates an individual expression of the diversity of the microbiome and the soil biome. And with that also of the wildlife that's around it and so on. As soon as you keep bringing other things in, and I mentioned that on the course on Tuesday, Steiner was actually called in to the farmers who kept buying in manure because the fertility in the cattle and in the plants was lower and lower and lower. And when they started keeping their own seed from the grains, they didn't grow anymore to the yields that they used to grow before they imported all this manure coming from the outside. So Steiner's principle of what he brings with biodynamics is to get everything from the air and everything from the soil and the plants that grow on that, because they will create a unique identity, a unique essence that I pointed out. That was one of the exercises. Yes, Sally, I'm seeing it. One of the exercises that the fourth part of the exercise, how do we identify this essence, this atmosphere that we're creating, that character of our place, and that grows from the soil. Sally, you had a question?
So this year, I've tried to extend my vegetable plot, and working on the no-dig principle, I planted potatoes because I understand that they break up the soil. Is that something that you would, as a biodynamic gardener, is that something that you would recommend?
Okay, that's a very good start. And usually a farmer who wants to get pasture into arable, so have no competition with the grasses anymore, he would use potatoes to actually create a good structure, a tilth as it's called also, and then the soil being ready for other crops, because potatoes are heavy feeders. So if you turn something, into a garden, potatoes benefit really highly from this fresh material that is the grass that was there and the sod and everything that's there. But it's not the potatoes that make the tilth or the structure. So I need to correct that possibly with how you said that. It's actually crops that we earth up. By moving the soil, we create the structure.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, if we move it too much, and if we move the soil too much while it's dry, we powderize it. That happens a lot in greenhouse culture. If we do it when it's too wet, we create clods, right? So it has to be at the right timing to create a crumb structure. And potatoes particularly, and for those who want to grow early potatoes, you want to, warm the soil up with quicklime and with soot, and then earth them, plant them high and earth them up as soon as possible, because as soon as you create that mound, like in raised beds, you have a higher potential for an exchange of the warmth and air and light and the water and earth moving up. And the four elements, literally, if you think, so you've got fire and light and air, and we got water and earth, mineral element, they literally start interpenetrating. And when you interpenetrate the four elements thoroughly in a homeostasis kind of way, then you have the highest growth, the highest vegetative and also qualitative growth of plants. So potatoes are fantastic to break a soil and, break a lawn into something where you then have a nice structure and no competition with the grass anymore if you don't want to mulch. If you mulch like Charles Dowding does, then you just mulch, put the compost and put the potatoes in the compost. So they're in the compost, not in the soil. Just one thing I was going to say with the import of compost to finish. If I take an inch as an example of how much compost is put on the land, that's 300 tons per hectare, or 30 kilograms per square meter. That's half a wheelbarrow per square meter of compost. In biodynamic gardening, when I worked in Germany in a production garden, the highest amount we would give for the highest demanding vegetables was about 60 tons, so about a third less. And the only ones that got that much compost were the tomatoes and maybe the cucumbers, because they need higher fertilization. The other thing that I noticed with the compost that Charles Dowding makes, he turns the compost and has a quick return system where you get you get effective humus. So you get a high release of nutrients very fast from that compost that you make that way. And you're not building humus long-term because you just keep adding new fresh kind of, not fresh compost, but it's effective compost that does not stay in a humus state. It just releases the nutrients very readily. So if I would take a biodynamic approach to analyze his garden or any no-dig garden, and would start looking at the quality of the plants in terms of the structure and the ripeness and the integration of, you know, what we talked about on Tuesday, what is enhanced by silica, which is another question today, to create more of the aromatic structural components of the vegetables, they might be lacking. And if I do a chromatography or a crystallization like Emoto does on the water, we have a method in biodynamics where we can crystallize plants and the sap of plants. You can see if a plant has a high quality in terms of nutrition or a lower one. So if you would fertilize a plant with fresher compost or effective humus, you would find that the structure of the plant is less developed than with a humus that's just like build a compost like I do. And I will post a few photos. Like today, I just took a few photos yesterday when I worked in the garden, where I just layer the compost and then the soil life in a year's time makes humus. There I get, with the help of the compost worm, a stable humus that lasts for ages and releases the nutrients through the interaction of the bacteria and mycorrhiza with the plants. If I have an effective humus or compost, it will release sometimes the nutrients through the water too fast. And then the plants grow really lush and beautiful, and I have a higher yield. And if I just compare yield from that kind of system, which is the no-dig, with the other one, which is biodynamic, they have a higher yield, but we have a higher concentration, possibly, and I'm saying possibly, of nutrients and, you know, health-giving elements that are in those vegetables. So you have to see, what do you want to compare? You know, you can't compare apples with pears, as they say. So it's not one is better or one is worse, but we have different results with quantity and quality, I would say. And I would love to get my hand on some vegetables from a no-dig and then see what happens with the crystallization and chromatography and see what the quality is. But I can see somewhat from the soils I've seen under a no-dig system, they're in layers, horizontal, they're separate. And in some instances, I'm seeing then thistles come in and plants that try to open that layer again. So that was a long spiel about the short question of no-dig versus dig. But I think, you know, you have to look at the whole picture. You have to put the dots together. You can't say one's better or this is, you know, doing this is doing that, because everything plays in. How you do it, where do you put the compost in the digging? You put it on top, do you work it in, do you put it underneath? There's so many different ways, but when we talk about the soils, we go more deeply into that. Does that kind of answer questions of everybody? So we had Sally, was it? No, where was where's the second screen gone? Here. No, it was Birgit. You tried the no-dig, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, you moved over.
Trying.
You're hiding in the second screen now. I try to find you. Good. Let's take up James and his observations he made. So what I'm going to do is I screen share quickly, so you can see what he did, the amazing work that he did, even with a garden plan. Love it. You're obviously a computer whiz.
Well, yes. Well, yeah. I live my life on the computer.
Yeah.
One reason I want to do something like this. So it's physical rather than digital.
Yeah. Yeah, I can do with more input from you how to create very neat images on the computer, because I'm like the old school, you know, like I would work on a blackboard with with the old no, I don't remember the English name now. the chalk. you call it, isn't it? Chalk, yeah. Colorful chalk, and create images and things with that, and drawings and things. Anyway, so let's go to your, oh, where was it again? So, where do I find it? I have to go to my email, I think. I could have pulled it up, but I didn't. Let's see quickly. Where's my email? Not there. Let's see here. James, let's just look quickly and pull it up on Google. If anybody has a question in the meantime while I pull this up, please jump in.
I wanted to ask about mulching, like non-dig is involves mulching, isn't it? And what I've just read also in Maria Thune's books, it's good to expose the soil during the winter to the cosmic forces and kind of charge it with cosmic energy. Is it maybe another benefit of the no-dig solution?
Let's go back to the no-share. I don't seem to be able to find it. I should have been prepared, but I was a bit delayed with my landscaping project today, so I couldn't pull your page up, so I apologize.
Maybe James will share it.
Can I, James, you're the whiz. Can I,
I've just,
have you all share the screen?
Yeah, I just popped the link in the chat for you.
Oh, cool, thank you. And I'll answer your question, Monica. Where's the chat now? Why can't I? Okay.
We also, you know, when we experimented with mulching, we thought it's so nice to cover the soil for winter. It looks like a, you know, like a nice cover, especially when there is no snow.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look so bare and exposed. But apparently, it's not the right thinking, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, in biodynamics, what we say is, if you can expose the soil as much as possible to the winter forces. So when you think of February, I don't know, for those who are in the Southern Hemisphere, obviously that's sort of July, August, moving into August. If you think, if you're in a climate where you have frost, has anybody ever seen ice flowers on the windows?
Yes.
You know what ice flowers are?
Mm-hmm.
And you see them on cars.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the formative forces that stream in from that region of the sky when the sun is in the constellation of the goatfish or the Capricorn, which are crystallizing forces, form-giving forces that help the soil to memorize the intelligence of the cosmic forces wanting to create plants. And each seed you put in the ground in spring is connecting to that kind of formative force. And when the seed starts germinating, it gets the information from the soil environment about these crystalline forces that create the structure of the plant. Its actual body, its actual structure, physical structure. It does not come from the nutrients. The nutrients don't inform the plant what kind of form to create. It's the formative impulse from the cosmos. You lay the seed in the ground and it reconnects with its archetype through those forces accumulated in the soil. And that's where the real birth of the plant is, not when it's pollinated or, you know, gone through a GMO process, and then you can manipulate how it expresses itself. That's separating the plant from those impulses. And those impulses that come in winter. And if the soil's open, it can take it up more readily than when it's covered. So that's a whole different way of thinking about soil and this exchange than when you just think about digging or not digging, or just yield, more yield or less yield. Birgit, you had a question, and also Sally maybe?
It was just, how would that work then in nature, say, when as far, you know, because I thought, oh, okay, you know, a tree sheds its leaves and then the leaves are on the ground, or if you have So in nature, it would be covered, wouldn't it? So how do the seeds there then get the cosmic forces? You know, how do they enter the soil when the soil is covered in nature?
Well, it's interesting what you just said. When you think of seeds, where do they get to lay?
On the ground.
On the top. So when the nature sheds its leaves and then its seeds and then its leaves, because the oaks shed first the acorns and then maybe the leaves are together. However, it depends on which year. There might be some leaves on them, but there's still light coming through those fine layers of leaves. It's just a very fine layer. And then the trees shed their leaves, and you see that the light can actually penetrate in winter through the canopy because there are no leaves anymore. So when you think of a tree is actually the soil extended to the height of the top of the canopy. And then the seeds are in the soil of the tree environment, so to speak. And then the few leaves that are falling there, they're not enough to cover them enough to eliminate those light and warmth forces. In the tropics, it's quite a different working because you have such strong warmth forces. They penetrate much deeper into the soil. There you need to actually, so the no dig comes really from a consciousness of the tropical, subtropical forests, where if you were to dig, you would even have more warmth penetrating the soil. It would be too much. But in our cooler climates, to bring warmth and light forces in, you have to open the soil. And then, as I said, with these other forces to penetrate, if the soil's open, the frost and the warmth, they're just the expression of the warmth ether or warmth forces. It's expressed in cold and freezing as much as in heating and agitating the molecules in a wild way. They're just two extremes of the warmth forces that are expressed in the soil. And in the tropics, you never have frost. So you don't need to open the soil up for frost like we do here. So they penetrate more deeply. Don't know if that answers that. That makes sense.
But in contrast, Hans-Gunther in the tropics, which is obviously where I am, you also have the summer, which is then, particularly here, it can be quite harsh and very, very hot. So you have the problem of the moisture leaving the soil very, very quickly during that time. So you also have to use, at least we use composting to maintain water inside the plants.
And you want to protect your soil. You want to, the hotter it gets, even in England in summer, the less you want to move it because you don't want to bring more warmth and more air to dry it out. We had a drought this year. So you're working also with the cycle of the year. So it's not dig, no dig. It's when, how, and how do you protect the soil when it needs protecting, and how do you open it when it needs opening? So I totally understand that with what you're saying in Australia, for example. It's your similar climate to when I lived in Spain. We needed to cover the soil and move it less because the more we moved it, the more we dried it out. And then you have to, you might have a cool time in the winter and you can open it up a bit to those other forces. But even in winter, it's very dry and the sun is still very hot, because the other thing you need to consider, and that's, the first mode of observation that I gave you on Tuesday is, where's the sun's path? Is it very high in the sky or is it very low? And here in England, 15, 18 degrees where we are above the horizon, and the arch is very, very small in winter. And then the light forces have to come from the distant cosmos to get into the soil, and you open it up for that. But in summer, with the sun's very high, we want to protect the soil. We might even mulch it. So we have to, become aware of those differences. So thanks for that contribution, Diane. Very good. So I have the document from James. Let's see where that is, if I can find it now. I opened it up, but where is it? Let's try this. Okay, here it is. If I share the screen with you now, oops, it disappeared again. What happened? Is it opening it again? Let's see. I'm sorry, with technology, I'm very slow. Oh, there it is again. Okay, so if I share the screen now, you will see James's garden, and he's done a nice drawing of it. I encourage you to do a map of your garden. So let's share the screen. And there it is. Let's move this over. Okay, James, are you there? Would you take us through your garden in terms of the first mode of observation, the physicality of your garden?
Yeah, so it's an allotment, so naturally very flat. Yeah, obviously rectangular plot, but there's some apple trees and kind of some nice some nice foliage kind of at one end, and I was quite lucky that there were 2 fairly decent sheds, and it's completely landlocked, so it's surrounded by lots of other allotments as well, so I suppose that does make it actually a bit more enclosed, but yeah, a bit more protected maybe from wind and that sort of stuff. It is on a floodplain, so that's a bit of a consideration for growing vegetables through the winter. And yeah, ultimately this, I've just taken it on recently this year, so the plan is it's kind of prepared and ready to go for next year, which was one reason to join this course as well, because it fitted in really nicely with knowing the right thing to do.
So you've made the wonderful suggestion also here in terms of your direction of the sun. So you know where the sun is highest, south is on the left on the screen.
Yeah.
And so have you got any growth or buildings on that side that could cast a shadow onto your plot, or is it open?
No, I'm quite lucky that the actual bed for growing is not overshadowed by anything at all.
Right.
So yeah, nothing at all.
Yeah. And so the only higher vegetation is on the north side with the trees and the wild growth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's more trees above and below based on this drawing. So on other plots as well, but yeah, that's the only thing that's kind of higher than the ground.
And then if you look at your soil, you mentioned something, how your soil condition is.
Yeah, it was a used plot with a few years ago. It was very overgrown when I took it on.
Yeah.
But it's forking it, I suppose, was quite nice because it allowed me to get to know the soil. It's quite sandy.
Yeah.
It was fairly easy to work, but it was in clumps. So just based on your description, I feel I've done the right thing by forking it, not using a spade at all. Because it had become compacted over not being used for a few years, and it being flooded within the last couple of years.
Okay.
But now it feels in a really good position, hopefully.
Yeah. Have you ever dug deeper than just the topsoil to see what's underneath, if there's clay, if there's sand, if you know, to know your drainage?
I did in one area.
Sorry?
Yeah, I did in just one small area. I was actually trying to get a bramble root.
Yeah.
Which it beat me, but it goes down to stones, but no clay. I didn't see any clay.
So is there pebbles below?
Yeah, about 2 forks, 2 spits depth.
Okay. And within the pebbles, there's some sand, or is it open, or?
A little sandy. Higher up is a little sandy, but further down it becomes a bit heavier soil, but not clay.
Not clay, okay. Because often what you might find is, because of history, in river sort of areas where there was a lot of flooding, you might have compacted clay layers much deeper down, because in ancient times, you know, when the glaciers were melting and all that, and the water was flowing much more rapid with the melt and everything, it would grind down the soil down to clay, and it would layer it in the river valleys. And you still have that, you know, deep down. And then the rivers kept flooding over the millennia and lay down gravel and other sand and other particles in layers. So in your situation, and you know, that's true for any valley, if you really want to study the history over the last few hundred years, when the floodings happened, and you know, the local people might have written things down. Very good to know the history when you get into the second mode of observation and dig down what's actually underneath everything. You know, just a little bit like with us, with our family history and our traumas in the family and upheavals, and that we carry all within, and they do affect us. You know, it's just like the subsoil affects the topsoil, and they want to be brought to consciousness and light. So the same happens in the human realm. So that's great observations. And then when you get into the, let's see, so you've done the map, you, about any build-up areas around other than the allotments around your plot?
Not very close. There is on the north side of the whole allotments is a row of houses.
Yeah.
But that's not very close. And on the south side is quite a distance away from my plot, but it's woodland really, and the river, and then a hill. It's not too high, but it's fairly offers some good shelter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your main challenge, would you say, is with the water and the flooding, possibly?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
We're kind of jumping around maybe a bit right now into the third mode, looking at the air and light and the movement of air and light, particularly the air, the wind. Do you have a main wind direction that affects your garden, possibly?
Not that I know of, no.
So it's not exposed to high winds or?
No, it's fairly protected because it's central to the whole allotment itself. It's fairly protected.
Okay.
And yeah, with trees to the south end and houses on the north end.
Okay.
So it's okay.
And your main wind direction would be the strongest winds from where?
I don't know actually.
Don't know. Okay.
I need to observe that.
That's an important question for everybody to consider wherever you are. So if you are like James in a valley which is protected and he has got in a near distance trees that act as a windbreak, he's not too concerned about the winds. But you might be on a hilltop, you might be on a slope on a hill, exposed to your main wind direction, where the wind literally blows into your hillside, and you will find that, you know, that will have a lot of detrimental influences, and it could be expressing itself through diseases and pests when the plants get stressed. It could express itself through drying out your land much faster than anywhere else, or it could even blow things over if you're not careful, and particularly when you have, you know, covered structures, etc. So it's a very important one to recognize. And then, are you aware, in terms of your water, how much water you have available where you are? Because that's another very important one. Your water household, you say, can flood, but for irrigation and so on, most gardeners don't realize, even in England, we need to irrigate for most of the year to get good crops. And I know some people try to work without that, but if you've got cultivated plants, they're pretty spoiled for a high need for water, even trees, apple trees and so on. So what's your irrigation situation? Have you got water available?
Yeah, just to as the map is here, just the top left is a water point. It's a trough ultimately. So it's kind of a watering can, walking backwards and forwards job. Okay. So you want to find ways to preserve your moisture in the soil, not to lose it. And we'll go into that, how to do that also through cultivating. So when I say cultivating the soil, I mean, it could be hoeing, it could be digging, it could be, you know, just scratching it or aerating it. There's different ways to cultivate your soil, which we'll be looking at in the soil module. So let's see,
coming to the, what's your situation being in the bottom of the valley? And this might be interesting for other people to look at also, is, do you have a lot of fog, mists hanging around? Do you get a lot of dew fall? Is it very clear, your area, because the wind blows through it and it's well ventilated? How is that situation?
Yeah, no, we definitely do get fogs and low-hanging mist. I've noticed as the sort of season has changed, a lot of moisture on the ground in the mornings. Yeah.
Okay, so that could also be very important to notice, because that will influence very strongly, again, your attacks with fungus and bacterial growth on the plants, if there's not enough ventilation and there's a lot of moisture. So we come in a minute to the silica question, you know, how to apply silica, which is a good one to avoid all these sort of conditions. And then for some people, it might be important to realize if they're close to the sea with salty sea air blowing in and a lot of humidity when they're closer to the sea, or if they're more continental and it's a very dry air and climate. So that's again from the third mode of observation. And then James, from the third mode, last question is there, how do you feel about your land when you're there and you might sit still there, and what does it sort of evoke in you as a feeling experience, as an inspiration that you get from that piece of land?
Yeah, definitely. One reason I'm on this journey really is I've just ended up working in sales and marketing, but I love being outside. So I've kind of had jobs because I needed to earn money, but I really wanted to do this and some other things to try and upskill in something I actually care about. So I loved digging over the plot, just very simple manual labor, but it was a lovely feeling to be able to stand back and see something completed, whereas I feel my job now is never ending. So very, very satisfying, and ultimately like being outside. So peaceful, even though I might be working hard and sweating, but peaceful and free is makes me feel.
So it's really good to get into that kind of state where you can feel what the land gives back to you. I mean, you're giving to the land by bringing your, you know, work and your creativity and all that to that piece of land, and then what comes back, it's a little bit like interacting with other people. Sometimes, you know, someone feels like they're giving more than they're getting back, but I think often we find if we go to a piece of land, you can really feel if it's vibrant, or if it's lacking something, or if it's evoking in you like elevated feeling, or if you're pulled down by it. And you can really go by that feeling. And then if you've done your observations thoroughly in the first mode of observation of all the physical details, so if you know your soil, from the topsoil down to the subsoil, down to the bedrock or mother rock, as I call it, you know your details of the soil right down to the depths. You know how the light and the air move through the arch around, and how the light and darkness distribution is in your garden. You know how that distribution is working in rhythm differently from summer, autumn, winter, and summer. So really to relive that deeply within yourself, knowing those details, will really get you in touch then with the identity of that place, which is like the fourth mode of observation. Also, as I said earlier, you know, how does the air and light move in those different seasons, and then also your distribution of water. So really being aware of the four elements, and then the fire element, which is expressed obviously in temperature. And you haven't been long enough probably on the land, James, just to finish this off, to take temperatures, to know when it's your first frost day in the autumn now. Have you had any frost yet?
No, not yet.
Okay, because you're a low-lying area there, kind of in a bowl of the landscape, isn't it? So the frost danger is much higher there, to be aware, than if you're on a slope. On a slope, usually the cold air drains away, just like the water. And if you're on hilltop, anybody on a hilltop, just, you know, be aware, or close to a hilltop, that you're much more likely to lose your warm air on a hilltop, and it radiates back out into the cosmos. And you might have frosts, early frosts there, or later ones in the spring. And those are all factors that you can vary and influence slightly with the biodynamic preparations and other means that we have as a cultivating individual. But, you know, they're kind of given, God-given, and you need to learn to work with them. So knowing those factors is really important. And just maybe to finish off, so knowing also what your dry temperature is. But if you look at the thermometer, often it doesn't give you the true temperature. It's an abstract temperature measured in a dry, you know, artificial column of mercury, inside protected. But if you are out in the wind, when the more moisture is in the air, you get the wind chill factor. If you stand out there, you notice what the plants experience. So you want to really, the more you're out in the garden every day and experience the 4 elements, and particularly the wind when it gets windy, and even you know, if you're in a hotter climate, for example, if it gets windy and you have a humid and hot air blowing, it's almost like a furnace. You want to be aware of that, and you know, like we need to be aware of these cold nights, like right now, where sort of 6 degrees, and the nights get clear, the sky clears up, and then you get these frosts. So you want to be really aware of that, particularly in the transition times. Also, for those who are composting and want to be more aware of the soil, it might be good to have a stick available, particularly when you begin the composting process and put it in, be aware of the warmth processes in the compost. So that's all in that kind of environment of warmth element. And observe your garden during the year, you know, every day. And I would say with all these elements that you're observing, keep a log, keep a journal to really write things down, because you forget things and you can go back to them. And then last but not least, when you bring those all together, these different observations, you will see that something of an essence of your piece of land will reveal itself, and you might want to name it, or, you know, call this essence by a name that exemplifies that essence and characteristic and atmosphere that your garden or your farm environment gives to you and gives to the environment. So those are the kind 4 levels. And, you know, the more you elaborate, particularly on the first level, and go into details and measure things, and, you know, become aware how your plants grow differently every year in terms of size and expression, that's where you become the true scientist and the child that discovers the new things that happen differently, and where your work has a response in the plant and in the garden, where you then see that, you know, you have like an evolution happening, where you have a living interplay between your contribution to the garden and what the soil and the plants and your garden gives back to you. So that's sort of the basic idea of this exercise of observing your garden. It's not a one-off exercise. It's something really to have in your back of your mind every day you are in the garden, to take a few moments and just look at your garden. Okay. So James, any last comment? Did this help you to get to know your garden better, to, you know, look at these different questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Your sort of the main questions, I hadn't necessarily thought about all of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was quite nice to get the lie of the land, ultimately, to appreciate what I've got, and I suppose that will allow me to do a better job as I try and grow and develop it over a few years.
Yeah, wonderful. And I mean, you know, we haven't, just one moment. We haven't touched even on, you know, observation of wildlife, for example, in the third mode with the air and light and the relationships. Anything that's, you know, in your hedges and your trees, to create that relationship also between the garden and its environment. Yes, please, Yin.
Oh, sorry. I've just had an anecdotal sort of story that I heard from someone. Touching on what you're actually saying about the weather and seasons and stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just laughing because it's quite funny. They said one way of actually testing whether the soil is warm enough is going out in the field, dropping your trousers and putting your bum on the soil.
I'm pleased you're saying it. It comes from you. I was going to say that, but I thought, well, I don't know what people will think about me.
I've heard that too. If you're planting your beans, you should, you should be able to put your bum on the soil.
And I would suggest an easier way is probably, though at this time of COVID, major doctors to boost the immune system say go naked into the environment, get as much sunlight and vitamin D3 and all that as possible. But also barefoot, you know how sensitive the feet are.
Yes.
You know, I'm always aware, working in the garden, whenever I'm comfortable, I take my shoes off. But I get cold feet very easily, not because I run and, you know, I'm fearful, like as they say in English, but because it gets too cold and then it will affect my kidneys. So the feet are, I think, you know, as sensitive as the bum we can bypass.
We need to do more forest bathing, Shinrin-Roku.
There, now, yeah, now you're talking.
I believe in Japan.
Yeah, absolutely.
To absorb the air.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, barefoot on the dew in the morning, get your extra nourishment and your discharge, and it's fantastic. Yeah. And it gets you really in touch with what's happening in the soil, because all you know probably that below 6 degrees centigrade, which is like very uncomfortable, which is happening right now, there's no soil activities, no soil life active. You know, the microbes come into a hibernation state. And if you think of the worms in the soil, anywhere between 15 and 25 degrees, the worms at their happiest. So, you know, it's good to know all these little details to know when it's time to stimulate different organisms. Please?
Did you say 25 degrees?
So with worms,
yeah,
between 15 and 25 degrees, which is really the temperature where the warmth-loving plants or the tender annuals thrive best. And you see, even right now, I don't know if anybody noticed my posts in WhatsApp, and sorry if I haven't put everybody on yet. Diane, I'm aware I got to put you on and others. I'm trying to catch up with everything. There was so much happening before launching the course. So 2 weeks ago, there was maybe one worm cast in a square meter. So again, you know, detailed observation, to the attention to the detail. A few days ago, there were like 5 to 8 worm casts in the same area on the lawn, and they were bigger and they were darker. And you go, how is that possible? It's getting cooler now. But the soil has accumulated warmth, and there seems to be something happening cosmically with the warmth impulses that come in. And it was very interesting that there was a planetary constellation with a warmth impulse coming, and suddenly the worms are more active. And it's not just the actual factual temperature on the thermometer. It's what happens in the soil and the warmth quality that is in the soil. You can't always measure it just absolutely with a physical temperature. So be aware of that. You know, sometimes you might feel it's really cool and the thermometer says it's really warm. But go by what you feel, not what the thermometer says. Put your finger, you know, the proof is in the pudding, put the finger in and taste it, kind of thing. So it's very important to be in touch yourself with your 5 senses as much as using, you know, sort of technical equipment. But I like the trousers. That also made me laugh a lot when I heard it first. So let's move on to the next questions. So we were talking about silica, but Flora had a question of compost. We talked also about compost. Quick question about compost. And I don't know if any other questions have come up.
Elena had a question about the hedge, and I was also interested on that.
The hedge?
Hedge around, having a hedge around your plot.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm quite interested in that too, Hans.
Yeah.
This is Diane.
Hedges are essential for the growth atmosphere. Let's go to Flora as she posted this earlier. Can I ask you a quick question about compost for my own little veggie garden? I have so much green material to put on the compost pile now. It is end of season, but very little brown material. So Green material being nitrogen rich, protein rich, and the brown material being carbon rich. Okay, so it lacks nitrogen. We do, however, have a big pile of wood chips that were recently chipped. I would ask Flora, are you on tonight? I can't remember if you said you were. Were these full of leaves?
I'm here.
Yeah. Were these with leaves, mixed with leaves? Was it warming up already, the wood chips?
Well, no, it's really freshly, it's freshly chipped. I mean, it is warm up.
Yeah.
But it's not really warm yet.
What kind of wood is it from what kind of trees?
It's a sort of mixture of hazel, old bits of oak, a little bit of beech. Yeah, it's sort of everything. It's from down the woods.
So I'm asking which type of woods it is, because some woods like the oak have a lot of tannin. And tannin, as you know, inhibits microbial life. So when we have an oak leaf mold, it takes much longer to break down than if we have willow or birch or alder or sloe or any of those leaves, which are much faster in breaking down. Yeah. And then beech also is very slow to break down. So the wood that burns longest in the fire takes longest to be burned, takes longest to break down also by microbes. So those who are good fire makers, they know which wood burns fast and which one burns slow. Same is true for the compost now. So if you'd mix those types of wood chips into your compost, because first of all, they inhibit quite a bit the bacterial growth, and then they slow down the breakdown. They would actually slow the whole compost process down, because they introduce a type of bacteria in your compost that break it down slowly.
Okay.
So personally, I would tend to compost those kind of wood chips separately. And if I can, add urine to it. So high 100%, urea, which then sets off the high carbon content. And if you do that and you put it in a very wet environment, cap it with soil, in a year's time, I promise you have black soil, even with even their wood chips and even their oak and beech.
Okay, because the wood chip that we've had in the past has broken down when it's all in a pile. It's taken a couple of years, but it makes amazing compost.
Absolutely, yeah.
But my problem is at the moment that my sort of garden compost as such, I've just got so much green stuff and not enough brown, and I don't know what to put on as the brown, and also how much manure I should put in too.
When you say green, is it grassy, or is it already gone to into stem formation?
It's kind of like all my tomato plants, all my rubber bean plants, all my courgette plants, all that sort of stuff.
Fabulous. Okay, so those ones have a balanced carbon to nitrogen ratio because they're already stalky. If you look at the stalks, have you tried to pull them apart? There's a lot of fiber in there, a lot of carbon and silica.
Yeah.
So those ones have an ideal ratio to just make a compost with them themselves if you have enough quantity.
Okay.
And then make sure that you layer them 10 centimeters of each of these materials with a sprinkling of wood ash, fresh wood ash or quicklime to help the breakdown, and then a bit of the soil from your garden to inoculate it.
Okay.
And as you build these layers alternating to maybe 60, 80 centimeters a meter, make sure you put the preparations in when you're finished, 40 centimeters deep. So that's the 5 compost preparations inside the pile, the valerian on top, and then cover it with a beautiful straw, or then you could cover it with the wood chips.
Okay.
A 10, 15 centimeter layer of wood chips, and you'd see on the inside these wood chips are breaking down faster because there's a lot of nitrogen generated. On the outside they might dry out, but they insulate the pile to create that warmth and that development over winter.
Okay.
And then the wood chips can, you know, be reused for another compost maybe later.
And what about manure? I should be putting on, so the green, the wood ash, the soil, and then manure? Or?
Okay, so if you just use the green material, you can use wood ash.
Yeah.
If you add animal manure,
yeah.
and you add wood ash, you drive the ammonia out. It creates this chemical reaction. You lose all the ammonia from the manure.
Oh,
so
okay.
if you make a compost pile with vegetation from plants and manure, just alternate them and put soil layers in between.
Okay, brilliant. Thank
you. 10 centimeter layers alternating. And then you'll see after 3/4 of a year, or maybe if you build now in winter, it takes a bit longer, but right now it's still pretty warm. 3/4 of a year to a year, without turning, it turns into black humus.
Fantastic. Okay.
Particularly with the preparations. Has anybody else followed that and maybe a question to that? Or are we all understanding what we're talking about? Composting.
I've got Hans. I've got, because I cleared my plot,
yep.
So I've got lots of dead matter. So yeah, fairly brown grass and weeds and that sort of thing. A huge pile of it with some layers of manure.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. And then always when you compost, make sure you take a bunch of the material, squeeze it through the hand, and if a drop comes out, that's the right moisture. If several drops come out, it's too wet. If it's not dropping at all or dripping, you need to add extra water.
Okay.
If there's no water, there's no chemical, no biological processes.
Okay. Yeah,
okay.
We've kept a pea pot. So yeah, we've been adding urine, which my 6-year-old son really found quite funny. But,
kids always find things very funny when they're not the done thing.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. My kids thought I was really out of myself with what I used to do. But I tell you, I made the most beautiful compost with my urine, and I would just always urinate on the compost part of the hedge trimmings. Okay. In 9 months, without turning it, black soil. I mean, humus. Oh, when we get to composting, we talk about the Cistercian monks and how they built. From pine. They built compost, pine debris. So we got this one done. So let's see, James. Yeah, no, Dick. So we have another question here. Should I be putting? Oh no, that was the same. Oh right, Emily. Emily, who is by the way not here, sends her apologies, but she wanted this question answered. That was about the silica, and I think it's very important right now for those who have access to Horn silica or the 501 preparation, which brings the light and the warmth to the plants. So for the last impulse right now, maybe to help plants to not get fungal attacks and things, we can apply that to the soil. And her question is, how does one apply silica to the garden? My husband is a chemist and said, silica is non-digestible for humans. And then she has also got the question, how does silica transform into calcium? Because we talked on the course, on the introduction, that we know in living organisms, plant, animals, humans, the chemical elements are transmuted. And there's been lots of scientists in the beginning of the last century that proved that calcium, okay, so say for example in the chickens, you measure what the chicken eats and how many minerals it takes in, which is usually silica, because they ingest a lot of stones. And the acid in the crop is so strong, it dissolves the silica that's in the stones they pick up to grind down the organic matter in the crop, because they don't have a stomach really, chickens or birds. That silica you measure, well, some scientists measured in the beginning of the last century, and then they measured the quantity of calcium the chicken takes up through the plants. And then they measure the weight of the eggshells from every day that they lay eggs. And you go, they don't eat enough calcium. Where do they get the calcium from? And as I've mentioned in the course, in biodynamics, we know that the oak tree is able to transmute silica into calcium, which is then found in the bark and in the wood laid down in very high concentration. And it goes on and on. In these compost preparations we're going to talk about and all that, it's all about alchemy. It's about transubstantiation of matter. Just like in nuclear fission and fusion, they transform through that process uranium into plutonium, strontium, cesium into different elements. The same happens so what happens in subnature with radioactive processes happens in supernature, which is endowed with life, that we transmute substances into other substances if they're missing. But you have to be, you know, in a homeostasis yourself. You have to be in a healthy state to do that. All the functions need to be happening in your body, and you need to, you know, have a diversity of nutrition. And then when you're healthy, you do that. When you fall ill, it's a sign that that actually doesn't happen anymore. And then there's the whole thing that, you know, her husband says, silica is not bioavailable. It's not, the matter is not that silica goes through the intestinal wall and makes then silica in our body. We take up silica homeopathically from the air and build our body and our skins, particularly membranes. The silica we eat from the fiber of the food and maybe a bit of soil that we eat. I hope you all eat your soil, the dirt. Eat dirt and lose weight. If you want to read a really good book by Dr. Hyman, or the other one's Dr. Axe, Eat Dirt, to get rid of all your chronic illnesses. Anyway, so that soil or that fiber you eat informs the gut bacteria, and the gut bacteria can actually destroy silica and release the light information that's in the silica through the gut into the blood. Then the blood goes to your periphery, to the skin, and says, skin, take so much silica from the air. I need more silica to rebuild your membranes, your arteries and everything that is in your body with membranes, cell structure and so on. So it's not that the silica is not bioavailable. It's the body through the microbes makes it bioavailable. And the same happens in the soil. If we feed the plant with homeopathic silica, or with the horn silica preparation where we grind quartz, the quartz crystal here, this one, we grind that to 1 micron, between 1 and 7 microns. We can have the plant take up that silica, put it into the soil through the roots, and feed the information that's in that silica and coming from the cosmos to the microlife and the mycorrhiza and so on. And they will help to release bioavailable silica for the plant and the information they need. So it's quite different from what we learned in school. You have to start going, oh, I've never heard that before. I have to think, I have to get familiar with that kind of thinking, with that kind of process. But that's, as I say, scientifically proven. Okay. Any questions on that? Yes, please, Yin.
Actually, it's not about the silica that you were on about, but about another form of silica, which is from mare's tail.
Yeah.
I have a question on that, actually, because I've read somewhere that there's two forms of mare's tail, not just one.
Yeah.
To complicate matters. And also, when do you harvest and how do you make it? Because I don't know anything about it, I gotta admit.
Well, you kind of missed it.
Sorry.
It's usually around July when it's in its, June, July when it's in its prime. So it comes up usually as a few stems with the spores, with a male sort of phallic kind of growth. It's just a tube and then like almost like a phallic kind of top with the spores. How it propagates itself, and then the female part comes up with it's almost like a Christmas tree but with no leaves, you know, just needles. You've seen it before, haven't you? No. It grows usually in disturbed soils where there's waterlogging, or like embankments where they put train lines, and or there are springs that come out. You're on a hillside and there are lots of springs, and then the mare's tail, or horsetail as it's called also, the field horsetail, it brings the light and warmth through the hollow of the stems and through the silica structure and through the spiritual element of sulfur into the soil, and heals the soil. That's where you find it. So around wetlands, it's often like someone built a wall and there's a bank, and suddenly the horsetail comes up because it disturbed the soil. And I got an eye now for a horsetail because you create this radar, like once you have an image of something, you find it. The reticular articulation system, activation system, it's called. So you visualize something long enough, you look at it, you find it everywhere, So a horsetail. And the horsetail, the most beneficial one is Equisedum arvense. And I'm gonna show you which one that is when we come up to spring. I'll show you the photos and the sketches and things so you can find it more easily. Because right now it's
Hans,
yes, please.
I have a question around that. Is that to create the silica mixture that you're talking about? And is there, because obviously that's in Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
The BioDynamic group here is talking about potentially using she oak, which is I guess like a casuarina tree that grows on the sort of sand dunes, and it's got long tassels that come down too. Is that kind of some of the stuff that you're talking about as well? Can you use that here?
Yeah, that's wonderful. You're researching that because many plants have a high concentration in the part, like you say, these tassels that hang down. I mean, think of the corn tassels from maize, 100% silica.
Yes.
So when I was in Mexico, I used that instead of horsetail.
Okay.
So yeah, you're on the right track with that tree casuarina, which I know from Mexico. And if they found that it has a high silica content, the only difference is the horsetail has also 5% of sulfur with it. So if you were able to find some sort of silica structure as a fruit on trees or leaves or needles or whatever that have both silica and sulfur. Sulfur, is an antiseptic, and silica rebuilds the structure so the spores of bacteria or fungus can't enter into the living structure of the leaf because it creates a waxy film around the leaf, and then the plant is protected. And that is plant-based and made with decoction. So boiling 20 minutes and then, bringing it to boil and simmering it for 20 minutes and letting it sit for a day to extract the silicic acid from those plants. But what we're doing also with what I said with this one, and we'll talk about this in spring and I'll show you how to make it, is crushing the quartz crystal. That's even more effective if you grind it down to a micron or such, and I'll show you how to do that. Well, in your case, it would be coming up now in your springtime that you make this preparation from quartz crystals. And traditionally we make it from the mountain quartz, the clear one, but they did also experiment with sand and with rose quartz and with amethyst. And that's then sprayed in a way, as I say, it works through the plant and activates the silica in the soil to make it bioavailable. Just like we take it from the air, becomes bioavailable through the information that comes through our food. So it's inverse with the plants, always inverse, as I said on Tuesday. Okay. And
thank you, Hans.
You're welcome, Dan. Yeah, and Emily, I hope this will help you when you listen to this. And then we have a last question here, and the question about the hedges. Also, I will not be able to apply a greenhouse to my small section, but our local gardeners recommend applying different types of cloths that keep the plants warm. They say it will extend the season by 1 to 2 months. Have you heard of these items being used? What are your thoughts? So the question is, if you don't have room to put up a greenhouse or a cold frame or such structure, could you protect your existing crops, which are outdoors, with some sort of thermal protective cloth or fleece, as it's also called? And yes, they're available and they're different qualities. I would go, you know, spend a bit more money on it if you want to go that way. Particularly if you have, you know, like white cabbage butterfly and things, they help in the spring to protect crops. But go for a thick, strong cloth, because I go to the garden center here and buy a thin one, and it's still very expensive because you get it from a garden center, because I wanted to protect my plants from the deer, and it worked. But in one season, the sun basically just burned it up. It becomes brittle. So, you know, spending more money on that. But having said that, the stronger they are, the more heavy metals are in those cloths. It's the metals that make those cloths resistant. Just, you know, like the sunscreen with whatever they put a metal in to do the sunscreen, particularly in the southern hemisphere. You use it a lot, probably. Well, it's to harden the plastic. And so it then gases into the environment, and then the plants or the soil would take it up. So I would say the safer way than using a cloth to extend your growing season, and that's a bit more labor intensive, is to use the valerian preparation that we have in biodynamics that will really help the plants, though the temperature is lower, to experience this warmth element through the valerian. And all you need in a 10 by 10 meter to protect your plants is a few drops, 3-4 drops in a couple of liters of water. Stir it 10 minutes in vortex fashion, and then spray it in a fine mist the evening before you expect the frost. And it will subtly, in the invisible, raise the temperature. The plant will experience the temperature differently, and you can avert frost damage down to -5 degrees. So the plant will experience more warmth through this preparation. It's the influence from Saturn. So it literally draws in Saturn warmth from the cosmos and lays a layer, like we put the valerian around the compost, a layer of warmth. So if you can avoid plastic, I would avoid plastic. It's a nasty material. I think we need to look more at regenerating our and regrowing our own seed that's more and more responsive to these finer, subtle elements that we're spraying into the air, into the soil, to help the plants to become naturally more resistant to frost and other influences that are coming now with pollution and radiation and all that. And in Germany, they have done a lot of research with that under high intensity power lines and things to make plants sensitized to the natural cosmic forces and not be influenced negatively by these EMFs and electromagnetic fields, what have you, or, you know, severe frost. We can literally have the plants tune into the other station, so to speak. So we have about the hedges here, and I see there are more messages here. Let's see. Right. Just to retrack quickly to the silica. How can we? So if how can we source quartz readily on a large scale without depleting the Earth's supply? That's a good question. There's another philosophical question in a way or philosophical outlook to answer it is, the quartz crystals have been laid down in the inside of the Earth in prehistoric times, not to be preserved, conserved. They're like our teeth, the hardest and most structured element in the organism of the earth. And I don't know if I want to go there, but you know, there's lots of invisible beings that are around these minerals, like even in the soil. If something crystallizes in the soil, we're actually trapping spiritual forces in a physical form. Once we grind them and release them, we release the forces and the beings that are trapped in there. I don't know if that makes sense. It's a little bit like if we were put in a prison, and yes, we would be free to think everything we can, and we're free in our thinking, but we couldn't apply ourselves in life because we're imprisoned in a cell. As a, you know, or you could say also, when we're not on this earth and we're out of our body, we're much more effective without a body than with a body. We're imprisoned in a body, and we have to obey to time and space. Well, the crystals have to obey to time and space. When we crush them up, we spiritualize them again. We liberate them from their prison. And we liberate the plants and the consciousness of humanity to a higher level, to then raise the earth into an invisible being again, what it was before. So if we are fixed with, we need to preserve what we got, biodynamics is not for you. Then you have to join a conservation society, or, you know, join the set-aside scheme of agriculture where everything is just wilded. Biodynamics is raising the consciousness and integrating wild and natural and cultural forces, and raise the consciousness to create chaos, to destroy and become creators. So that's how I see the crystal question for me, is like, you know, who asked the question?
Yeah, it was
Lisa?
me. It was Lisa who asked the question. And I was asking more on that philosophical ground that you were answering the question, thinking about how obviously in biodynamics, you're using it to unleash the powers to give life to the soil, but then thinking about other aspects of how humans utilize the crystals as well. And it seems like if we were to expand biodynamics across the planet, we would need to be sourcing more crystals, but also they're sourcing more crystals for, you know, our computers and for other things. And so, you know, at some point, I guess there is a question of, is everyone utilizing it, you know, properly? Is there enough? Is there a way we can give back? So that's where it was coming from.
It's such an amazing question, because you're touching on such a fundamental question of life. So in the computer industry, and even in the solar cells, they use quartz. Okay, and they used to use proper quartz crystals, natural ones. But there's such a demand for quartz now, and quartz crystals in the chips of everything that wants to be chipped and digitalized, that they're creating artificial quartz. Just like in the agricultural field, you know, they started at some point developing artificial nitrogen under high pressure, lots of energy, lots of waste products of chemicals to produce it, you know, technologically. So that's how they are doing it. What we're doing and what we're developing into the future is, some people are working now also on creating homeopathic corn silica preparation, so potentizing it. So there's a lot of research going into which potency could replace the actual preparation, where we use 4 grams per hectare. So, you know, this one is about 200 grams. So I could use for 50 hectares, that's, you know, half or a third of a big farm that provides food for 1,000 people or more per year.
Okay.
And there are tons of crystals in the earth, but as we evolve and we might reduce the quantity available, it gets too expensive. If we homeopatize it and potentize it, we will then be able to multiply it 1,000,000-fold. And that's the opposite of what they're trying to do in technological development, where they're trying to reproduce it And then I would say, you know, create a dead world that's even deader and deader. It's dying. It's like fixed into a computer, into a dead structure. I call this subnatural. That tethers people to the earth, and everything, every substance is tethered to the earth. We're here as humans to actually, Steiner calls it etherealization, to make it etheric again, invisible. So there's only life forms that are invisible again. And some people call that the New Jerusalem. You know, it's the next life form that's on a higher plane, on another dimension. That's, according to Steiner, 8,000 years in the future, because Earth history is much shorter than it's made out to be.
That's a really beautiful answer. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. A wonderful, beautiful question. And that's why you get a wonderful answer. Last but not least, so Swella put in what kind of fleece you could use in terms of the density or weight per meter. And then hedges. It's a whole subject in terms of creating living cells and beings around your garden. You know, when you think of all the amazing life that can happen in a hedge, particularly if it's a multitude of different species that you put in a hedge with small trees and so on. But when you think just of fertility and of healing of the soil, and I don't know, in Australia, for example, and in the tropics, you would use the legumes a lot. The legumes are really life-giving for us, like the casuarina and, you know, the acacias. They're edible acacias everywhere. I was in the library of Alexandria, and they have studies in Egypt of 1,000 acacias that are edible. You know, I got it somewhere stashed away. And when I was in Mexico, there was hundreds of varieties that are studied and documented that could be edible. And then they make building wood, and then, you know, they enhance the soil life. And if you don't have animals, it's a wonderful way to put legume plants and shrubs. Like here in England, we have the broom, you know, and they made brooms from it. But also the broom brings nitrogen into the soil. It brings vitality in the soil, it brings astrality. So the legumes, they have something of the quality of the animal. So if somebody wants to do vegetarian or vegan biodynamic farming, gardening, bring the legumes into your garden. And the legumes bring this insect butterfly quality through the flowers. If you look at the flowers and study the flowers, and the trees even more so. So the more you're in tropical, semi-arid climates, the legume trees are the answer into the future, I think. Does that kind of ring a bell for you, Diane, in Australia?
It's interesting because I guess that's one of the questions, you know, around hedges here. Hedges is kind of very, I guess, a European thing.
Yeah.
You know, my father is English, so I totally understand what a hedge is and why that's important from his point of view.
Yeah.
But here, I would say, because things grow so fast, a hedge is quite difficult to maintain, and we kind of have sort of a system where, particularly here, you know, you've got sort of, because I live on quite a steep slope.
Yeah.
We've got retaining walls between sort of your house and the next house, and a fence. And we've tried to kind of grow vegetation in between our two properties, I guess. But it's not necessarily what I would call, you know, the typical European hedge.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely vegetation growing between the two, like lilies with really big bulbs and native trees and things like that, but not your typical hedge. So I was quite curious for that.
Well, what's a typical hedge? Because, you know, there's
yeah.
Now everybody's got Leylandii hedges here. I don't know in Australia if they would grow there. Probably, you know, if you have coniferous hedges.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Any conifer, that's just a monoculture, right? And then the roots are shallow and rob all the moisture from your garden. And then you keep pruning them because they grow so fast and they want to grow big. But they make a dense hedge, you know, every man in his castle kind of thing, you know, separate from the other garden instead of being united. But then the traditional hedge is a multitude of different plants. You know, there's the thorny hedge, there's the fruiting, there's the roses, there's the honeysuckle in it, there's, you know, the hazel there, the nut trees and the nut shrubs, and everything is mixed in. And you have 20, 30 varieties of plants that nourish the human and the animals in nature. That's the true hedge. That's where the hedge came from. And then the hedge effect was that the hedge was a windbreak that kept the growth atmosphere in the garden or in the farm. And then in the transition area, it's where the plants would grow best, and the most diversity of other species of, you know, annuals and perennial grasses and flowers would develop, because you have this transition from a microclimate of hedge that's very cooling in summer and very warming in winter to the more open area in the garden or in the field. And that transition area, the edge effect, as they call it in permaculture, or as we call it, where the four elements intertwine and, you know, come and weave together and help this expansive growth of diversity and also quantitative growth, that happens in these transition areas. So the more hedges you can have, I would say even every 10 meters a hedge, the more you create these living cells that breathe, and, you know, there's so much more life happening and diversity. And particularly if you start thinking of, you know, the sloe, for example, the birch and the alder tree in our climates, or as I said, in a more tropical situation, the legume trees and shrubs, which grow very fast. And when I was in Spain, I could use legume trees. There was a nursery with legume trees, and we cut just the branches, put them in the compost. In half a year, they make black soil. They're so rich in nitrogen that you can use the trees to make compost. And then you have goats and sheep, and they love it. They just absolutely love it to bits, even with the thorns they have. And, you know, it's a wonderful means to make fertility on the land. But hedges here, they need to have everything, you know. They need to have the what's it? Is it the wild man's beard? No, you know, the wild clematis.
Old man's beard.
Old
man's beard.
Sorry?
Old man's beard.
Old man's beard. Yeah. No. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, just think of, you know, thorns for the birds, so they can actually breed in there and have their nests. So they're protected from all the prey animals that might get into the nests. And then you have the fruit bearing, the nut bearing. We go into that. I think we need to do a session on that. I hadn't planned it, but it's kind of more detailed already, but we can maybe make a list of them so you can see what you can put around your garden. And then if you want more of an ornamental, you know, hedge line, you can also mix plants that are evergreen. So evergreen is better because you create more of a windbreak in the winter when usually the leaves drop. But evergreen, not coniferous. I would stay away from coniferous. They inhibit growth forces. They are very antiseptic, just like eucalyptus in Australia. And if you bring eucalyptus here, it's worse, because in Australia, at least, it breaks down. There are microbes to break it down because it's natural there. But where we are, it's so antiseptic, it kills all the life around it. So eucalyptus, unless you have a big terrain and you want to have just one tree, it's okay, but I wouldn't put them in a small garden. And then as little or no conifers around your garden as you can, because again, they suck the soil dry and they kill all the microlife. So that's just a few principles there. Okay.
Do you think that Monty Don's place has many hedges? Is that the sort of example you're thinking of?
Well, if I would know his place, and I would have been living here in England long enough to have time to visit his place, I could give you an answer, but I've been so much involved with other things in the way that I don't know his place. Is that the Bellevue, or what is it called?
World Man.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, if you find any images and maybe put it on WhatsApp or something to show us. I have no idea what his place looks like.
Okay, right. I think most English gardeners will watch it. It's every Friday during the season.
Okay. Sorry.
Can I just add? Sorry.
On television?
Yes.
Which program?
Yes. It's BBC Gardener's World. BBC.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. I don't watch television, so I don't know Gardener's World.
I do. Can I just add that Monty Don has actually taken out a lot of his box hedging because it had blight for quite a number of years.
Yeah. Well, box.
Just to let box, yeah.
Box hedges come from calcareous rock from limestone regions in hot climates in the Pyrenees and south of Pyrenees originally. So coming into a climate like this, they're very prone to blight, particularly on silica soils and waterlogged soils.
Yeah, so he does get waterlogging, yeah.
Yeah, that's a problem that people don't realize. So if you do plant a box hedge, you have to lime your land really well, a lot of limestone, a lot of drainage, just like with lavender and rosemary, because they all grow originally in the limestone areas around the Mediterranean mountains. Very dry, very hot, and well drained. Yeah. Good comment on the box. Anybody else has a suggestion for hedges? What experiences have we got? And then we close in a couple of minutes. We've gone a long time today, but there were some really good questions. So thank you so much.
Hedges.
Hans?
Oh.
Yes, Jude.
Hans?
Jude?
Yeah, from my limited knowledge, the traditional country hedge is called a Saxon hedge.
Uh-huh.
And it's native plants like hawthorn, holly, guelder rose.
Yeah.
Oh God, what else? There's about 6 or 7 of them. I have a list.
Yeah.
But that's the traditional hedge.
Yeah. And the holly
for sectioning off fields.
Birds, yeah. And then you've got the sloes, are really important.
Yep. So hawthorn, blackthorn, hazel.
Yeah.
Guelder rose, anyway.
And then, of course, in the traditional hedge, you would have every so many tens of meters, you would have a mother tree of an oak, and you would have alders, and you would have alders, by the way, a legume. Well, it's not a legume tree, but it's got nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And then you have sambucus, which is the elder tree. The elders, if they're not bushes, they grow into trees, which are really good for healing medicines for humans, also in animals. And yeah, just all the different roses, like you said, the guelder rose and all that. So wonderful to have them all weaving in there, and the honeysuckle and all these climbing plants. As much variety as we can find. So I'm going to put a list out. I'm going to put one together. I've got a list here for the hedges. And then I see there's quite a few more questions. So we're running out of time. So I will take up those questions that popped up today for next time. Mm-hmm. And please send me an email, or, in the meantime, if you have got questions come up also from the course on Tuesday, I hope that answered most of the questions here, and it will help you to not so much just have answers, but inspiration to look for more answers and have more questions. With that, I say goodbye to you today on this session 1 of Q&A of Grow Your Own Health. And I'll see most of you on Tuesday, same time, 8 p.m. summertime, England, UK, Greenwich time, and wherever you are on the globe. Bless you, and have an amazing, fruitful gardening experience.
Thank you.
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 Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The second page, yeah, okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Wonderful. See you soon.